Today we're going to find out what you get when you combine a grease pencil artist with a grease pencil animator. Hello everyone, welcome. This video is in collaboration with Sophie Jantak. Sophie is an incredibly talented artist who uses Blender grease pencil in a beautifully unique and inspiring way. Her channel focuses on creative ways of making amazing art using Blender grease pencil. In this collaboration, we will each create an environment using grease pencil. And then we swap and create a character that fits the environment the other creator made. So I'll pass over to Sophie now so she can show you the amazing world that she's making for me.
Hey, Sophie here. So I started recording my screen once I got to the painting portion of my process. And so before that, I made my reference image, which you can see I have displayed to the left using the app PureRef. And so this is just a photo that I found in a magazine. I scanned it and I brought the file into Blender and painted over it with grease pencil. What I liked about the original image was the zigzag of the trees into the background. And so I did my paint over focusing on that. I used the custom curves within Blender to just experiment with different color options and see how I could push the colors of the image. Almost accidentally, I got these pink clouds and I really liked it. So then I brought the image into Blender as a plane and used the grease pencil eyedropper tool to get an initial color palette. Next, I sketched in my rough concept, again using grease pencil, this time emphasizing the zigzag motion even more and getting an overall angular shape to my piece, more angular mountains, angular clouds in the sky. So I put down a background color using a 100% opacity fill material, and then I used gradient fills to start coloring the piece. So I have 5 different gradient fill materials that I have pre-prepared in my blend files. They range from very light to very dark. I also use the transform fill tool in edit mode to get the gradients exactly how I want, in the cases where I want them to be at a particular angle or with a specific strength. And then before long, I started adding stamps to my artwork. I really enjoy using these in conjunction with gradient materials. If you're curious, I talk about them in depth on my channel, but they're basically PNG images with a transparent background that I insert into grease pencil fill materials with a texture style. I started using them as a way to add variety and texture to this incredible vector software that maybe doesn't innately have texture. So this was working within the limitations of my computer, which did not respond well to like full textured brushes. And so this was my workaround and it worked really well. And then I just kind of fell in love with it. It's, you could say slow, I would say methodical. I don't know, maybe it's not the most optimal way to go about making art, but I don't think that's a big deal. I spent many years making art only focused on the end product, not caring if I enjoyed the actual art making process itself. And spoiler, I did not. And I just can't do that anymore. I choose to make art using a process that I find joyful, and for whatever reason this is it. It certainly took me by surprise, but I love collaging as a creative hobby, and this feels like that. It feels exciting and always different. And so I also use a lot of sculpt tools to modify the shape of the strokes. And in the case of the gradients and textures, I sometimes use this to contain them to specific areas of the piece, sort of like masking, but for individual strokes rather than whole layers. And so I have my render window floating in the screen, and I use an HSV to BW node in the compositor, RGB to BW node, so that I can press F12 to render my scene and keep an eye on how my values are looking. Something else I like to do, especially when I'm deep in the rendering process and the changes are getting increasingly subtle. So while hovering over the render window, I like to press J to toggle two different render image states. And so I render the blend file when I first open it, that painting session, and then I press J. And in this toggled state, I keep rendering the image. And so this helps me flip back to how my piece looked when I first opened my blend file, and I can see how it's evolved since then. And so this is both to make sure that I'm keeping along the right path, to make sure that as I add details, I'm not losing the simple statement or the value structure of my piece, which is always a risk when you start adding details. And so this is also just a morale booster as well. It lets me see how far I've come, especially in the end stages when it can feel like I'm just inching along the canvas. So that's about all I have to say. I don't keep track of my time very closely, and so I'd estimate this piece in total took maybe 5 hours, including the preparatory stages of finding and modifying references, as well as the sketch. And so these are a significant amount of times, but it really helps me to do these preparations before diving in with a painting. So I'm really proud of it. This was a lot of fun to do. Thank you again to Joel for reaching out, and I'll let him continue.
Thank you, Sophie. Wow, I am blown away by this environment. It's so beautiful. I absolutely love the zagging forest and the bright touches of color. I love the shape of these mountains and these igloos propped up against them. Who lives there? Why do they live up so high? There are so many questions and so many different directions that I could take with this character. I can't wait to get started. So first, I had to come up with a design. I had a lot of ideas ranging from bees that use the igloos as hives, or polar bears and yetis. In the end, I settled on the idea of a character who lives in a tribe of people who can fly. And that's why they live in the igloos so high up. When finalizing the design, I like to keep it as simple as possible by just using 2 colors. Once I come up with the basic ideas, it's time to bring it to life in Blender, ready to be rigged. Early on, I decided to keep the entire character on one object. I've never done this before, but now that I've tried it, I love this workflow. It keeps everything self-contained. With the grease pencil done, with everything separated onto their own layers, I started rigging. This is essentially taking the drawing that I've made and giving it controls so we can move it around and animate it. I'm really proud of what I created. Each limb can switch between inverse kinematics, where we have a control at the end of the limb and control everything from there, and forward kinematics, where we control the limb from the base outwards. Also, I added this cool control to the torso, where we can rotate it from the center of gravity, as well as add some stretch and squash. The face was fairly simple, however I'm really happy with how dynamic it is. Just by moving, rotating and scaling a few bones, we can create just about any facial expression I can think of. After a quick test animation, a walk cycle, I tried out some different color themes, trying to make her fit into her environment better. In the end, I settled on a very similar color scheme as I had before, hot pink. It's finally time to get started on the actual animation. But before I can do that, I need to import the character. The usual way that I would go about this is appending it to the scene, which copies objects and collections over from another file into this one. However, the disadvantage of doing this is if I want to change anything about the rig, I would need to change it in this file, and it would no longer be the same as the character file I got it from. Instead, if we use link, then any changes made in the original file will carry over to here. Unfortunately, having done this, we've lost control over the rig and can't animate the character. So what we need to do is press F3 and search for Make Library Override. This was the first time I tried this method, and something I found out was that by default, any custom properties could not be edited in a linked collection. For instance, this slider that changes the mouth shape is grayed out and can't be changed. To fix this, all I had to do was go back into the rig file and edit each of these custom properties so that this "is library overridable" box is checked. This method requires a little more hassle to set up and to get used to, but it's all worth it. Several times during the animation, I found something that I wanted to change, and I was able to open the rig, make the change, and it would be updated in the animation. With the character now in the scene, my idea for the animation is that the character will walk on, wave to the camera, and then fly safely home to the igloo. So with that in mind, here's a little time lapse of my animation workflow. So at this point, I wanted the character facing away from the camera. So I duplicated the character file, edited it so it would appear from the back, and then imported this as another linked character. Finally, I have the animation complete. I decided I wanted to create some snow just to add to the atmosphere and to complement Sophie's environment. To do this, I added a new render layer and hid everything else, and added a new plane. I then just added a particle system to the plane and adjusted the various settings to make it look like snow. Then I added wind and turbulence force fields. Finally, I combined the snow with the rest of the scene in compositing. And after a little color correction, it was done. So here's the final result. I hope I made Sophie proud. I'm amazed at how similar but different our environments are. So if you want to see the world that I made for Sophie, and how she developed her character around that, and this is the really important part, you need to go to Sophie's channel, follow the link in the description, for the not to be missed other side of this collaboration. Sophie's channel is full of amazing grease pencil art, tips and tools, so go subscribe, you won't regret it. Thank you all for watching, I'll see you around.